What if the story of South Carolina, a state known for its historic plantations, Gula culture, and Civil War battlegrounds, holds a genetic past far more complex and surprising than we ever imagined? A groundbreaking DNA study has unearthed layers of ancestry woven through centuries of migration, resistance, and cultural blending. From ancient Native American roots and transatlantic upheavals to unanticipated ties with distant continents, South Carolina's genetic history tells a riveting tale of survival, identity, and transformation. Let's explore the hidden heritage of South Carolinians and discover what their genes reveal about one of America's most storied states. Why South Carolina's genetics are unique. South Carolina's genetic statescape is a rich mosaic shaped by centuries of migration, colonization, forced displacement, and cultural blending. Unlike many other U.S. states, South Carolina sits at the crossroads of several major historical movements, each leaving a distinctive imprint on the genetic makeup of its residents. The state's genetic uniqueness is largely influenced by its colonial past, its key role in the transatlantic slave trade, and the early interactions between indigenous peoples, Europeans, and Africans. The Low Country region in particular was a major point of entry for enslaved Africans during the 18th century. It's estimated that nearly 40% of all African slaves brought to North America came through Charleston's port. As a result, many African Americans across the country can trace some of their ancestry to South Carolina. This African influence, particularly from regions like Sierra Leone and Ghana, remains embedded in the genetic and cultural DNA of the state, visible in language, food, music, and familial ties. In addition, Scottish, Irish, German, and French Huguenot immigrants settled across South Carolina in the 17th and 18th centuries, often in isolated rural areas where intermarriage within communities helped preserve unique European genetic lineages. Native American tribes, such as the Catawba and Cherokee, have also contributed to the state's genetic tapestry, though their numbers dwindled dramatically due to disease and displacement. These intertwined lineages, along with recent Latin American and Asian immigration, make South Carolina one of the most genetically diverse states in the Southeast. This diversity is not always visible on the surface, but is deeply embedded in family histories and genetic markers. As new genomic research tools evolve, they continue to uncover unexpected connections and a deeper understanding of how South Carolina's unique history shaped its people at the most fundamental level. Found this interesting? Make sure you subscribe to keep updated about more scientific facts. The groundbreaking study. A recent groundbreaking genetic study led by a consortium of universities and research centers has brought new light to the ancestral roots of South Carolinians. Using advanced DNA analysis and historical records, scientists collected genetic data from over 10,000 residents across various regions of the state. The study, which spanned 5 years and included collaboration with local communities, tribal leaders, and genealogical societies, revealed striking insights into the genetic composition of South Carolina's modern population. One of the most surprising findings was the degree of genetic continuity among African American populations in the Low Country, many of whom carry a strong genetic signal from the Mende and Tammany people of Sierra Leone. This confirms oral histories and cultural evidence suggesting a direct link to the Gula Geechee community, descendants of enslaved West Africans who preserved more of their heritage due to geographic and social isolation. Equally fascinating was the unexpected presence of Mediterranean and Sephardic Jewish genetic markers in areas of the Piedmont and Midlands, likely remnants of early European settlers whose origins were previously undocumented or misunderstood. This suggests that the state's colonial and antebellum history may be more complex and diverse than traditionally acknowledged. Native American ancestry, while present in smaller percentages, also showed notable genetic clustering, particularly among individuals in the northwestern part of the state. The study further identified rare European haplogroups that are uncommon in the general U.S. population, implying that some early immigrant communities in South Carolina remained genetically distinct for generations. This research is already reshaping historical narratives and sparking renewed interest in personal ancestry among residents. Moreover, it has implications for medicine and public health, as understanding genetic variations across populations can lead to more tailored healthcare solutions and insights into inherited conditions prevalent in specific communities. DNA research sheds light on ancient origins of South Carolina population. Recent advances in genetic research have unveiled a far deeper and more complex origin story for South Carolina's population than previously known. While the state's colonial history has long been documented, DNA evidence is now tracing ancestral roots back thousands of years, offering a remarkable glimpse into the ancient origins of the people who call South Carolina home. Using advanced genome sequencing and historical population modeling, scientists have been able to identify genetic markers that link present-day South Carolinians not only to European, African, and Native American ancestors, but also to ancient populations that predate written history. These include early West African farming communities, prehistoric European hunter-gatherers, and indigenous peoples whose ancestors may have arrived in North America over 15,000 years ago via the Bering Strait Bridge. One of the most profound discoveries relates to the DNA of Native American tribes such as the Catawba, Pee, and Cherokee, whose ancestors have lived in the Southeast for millennia. Genetic data indicates a continuous human presence in the region dating back at least 10,000 years. Despite centuries of displacement and cultural erasure, these ancient lineages persist today, hidden within the genomes of thousands of individuals who may not even be aware of their indigenous roots. Similarly, the African American population in South Carolina, especially in the Low Country, retains strong genetic links to ancient populations in West and Central Africa. These ties go beyond the era of slavery and point to civilizations with rich cultural and genetic histories, such as the Minde, Temne, Yoruba, and Akan peoples. DNA research is now helping African American families reclaim lineages lost through generations of forced migration and systemic erasure. European-descended South Carolinians, too, carry echoes of the ancient past. Their DNA often traces back to early Celtic, Nordic, and Mediterranean populations that migrated across Europe over thousands of years before arriving in the Americas. This ancient genetic insight reframes South Carolina's story, not just as a tale of colonial settlement and slavery, but as a vast, interconnected web of human movement that spans continents and millennia. In the strands of DNA, researchers are uncovering echoes of prehistoric migrations, ancient communities, and forgotten ancestors, reminding us that South Carolina's people are not only the product of recent history, but of the enduring human journey itself. The genetic map of South Carolina. The genetic map of South Carolina, as revealed by the study, is a striking visualization of ancestry, migration, and settlement patterns that have shaped the state's population. Divided regionally, the map reveals clear genetic clusters that correspond with known historical trends, offering both confirmation of long-held assumptions and unexpected revelations. In the coastal Low Country, there is a strong concentration of West African ancestry, most prevalent among African American communities descended from enslaved people, brought to work in the rice and indigo plantations. The Gullah Geechee heritage is genetically distinct within this cluster, retaining high levels of African ancestry with minimal European admixture compared to other African American populations across the U.S. Moving inland toward the Midlands and the Piedmont, the genetic statescape becomes more mixed. Here, there is a greater blend of African, European, and indigenous ancestry. European contributions come predominantly from the British Isles, but the study also identified smaller pockets of French Huguenot, German Palatine, and Iberian DNA, pointing to waves of lesser-known immigrants who settled in the region over centuries. Native American genetic markers, although less common, are still traceable, particularly in descendants of the Catawba and PD tribes. The Appalachian region in the northwest of the state shows a different profile, dominated by Scotch, Irish, and English ancestry with minimal admixture. This reflects the isolation of many mountain communities, where intermarriage within close-knit groups preserved European lineages. Interestingly, the map also found traces of Melungeon heritage, a mixed-race group historically marginalized and little understood, now gaining recognition through genetic data. Overall, the genetic map serves as a biological chronicle of South Carolina's past. It helps contextualize cultural practices, dialects, and even disease prevalence. For historians, genealogists, and scientists, this map offers a new lens through which to understand identity, migration, and heritage in a state whose complex history is now being traced not just in documents, but in DNA. How history shaped the DNA of South Carolina. South Carolina's genetic statescape is inseparable from its complex and often painful history. Every gene pool within the state tells a story rooted in centuries of migration, colonization, conflict, and survival. From the 17th century onward, the region became a key site in the Atlantic world, with waves of European settlers, enslaved Africans, and interactions with indigenous tribes all converging in this coastal corridor. The transatlantic slave trade had one of the most profound impacts on South Carolina's genetic makeup. Charleston was a major port of entry, and enslaved Africans brought with them diverse genetic lineages primarily from West and Central Africa. These populations were often forced into isolated plantation communities, particularly in the Low Country, where over time, a unique African American identity, exemplified by the Gullah Geechee, developed and endured. Meanwhile, European settlers from England, Scotland, Ireland, Germany, and France brought their own DNA into the mix. Many settled in specific regions, such as Germans in the Midlands, or Scots-Irish in the Piedmont, and their genetic legacies remain concentrated in those areas. Intermarriage, isolation, and community traditions helped preserve these lineages. Indigenous peoples such as the Catawba, Cherokee, and Yamasee also contributed to the gene pool, although displacement and disease greatly reduced their numbers. However, traces of their ancestry remain in both self-identified native populations and through mixed heritage lineages. The Civil War, Reconstruction, and the Great Migration further shaped the state's demographics as African Americans moved northward and new populations arrived. Each historical phase added another layer to the state's genetic story. Today, DNA can confirm what oral traditions and historical documents suggest: that South Carolina's identity is a living record of resilience, migration, and mingling, etched not just in memory, but in its very genes. Genetic time capsules. Certain communities and individuals in South Carolina carry what researchers call genetic time capsules, segments of DNA that have remained remarkably intact for centuries, passed down through generations with minimal outside mixing. These preserved lineages offer scientists a rare window into the past, allowing them to trace genetic origins with surprising clarity and accuracy. One prominent example is found within the Gullah Geechee population along the coastal Low Country. Due to centuries of geographic and cultural isolation, this African American community retained a high percentage of West African genetic markers, particularly from Sierra Leone, Liberia, and the Gold Coast region. These markers act like time capsules, providing direct biological links to ancestors who were forcibly brought to America during the transatlantic slave trade. The preservation of both culture and genetics among the Gullah is among the strongest in the United States. Similarly, isolated European-descended communities in the Appalachian foothills and the Sandhills regions carry relatively unmixed DNA from 17th and 18th century settlers. This includes lineages from the Scottish Highlands, French Huguenots, and German Palatines. In some of these areas, surnames, cultural customs, and genetic data align in ways that paint a clear picture of historical continuity. Native American DNA in South Carolina also survives in time, capsule-like patterns, though in smaller amounts. Where tribal groups were displaced or assimilated, their genetic legacy often persists in families unaware of their indigenous roots, now rediscovered through DNA testing. These genetic time capsules serve as more than scientific curiosities. They are heritage markers. They validate oral traditions, preserve endangered histories, and offer individuals a tangible connection to ancestors who endured incredible hardship. In doing so, they keep those stories alive and relevant in the modern age, creating a bridge between past and present through the code of life itself. Genetics versus culture. While genetics can uncover biological ancestry, it doesn't always align neatly with cultural identity. In South Carolina, the tension and interplay between genetics and culture highlight a deeper truth. Who we are isn't always who our DNA says we are. Culture, shaped by history, environment, language, and personal experience, often carries more weight in how people identify themselves than what a genetic test may reveal. For instance, someone in South Carolina may identify strongly as Gullah Geechee, Cherokee, or Irish American, even if their DNA tells a more complex or contradictory story. In the Gullah Geechee community, cultural preservation through cuisine, folklore, music, and language has been as crucial as genetic continuity in maintaining identity. Even those with diluted African ancestry may still see themselves as Gullah because they were raised within that community and inherited its traditions. Conversely, some people may discover through genetic testing that they have significant ancestry from a group they had no cultural connection to. A white resident of the Piedmont might find unexpected African or Native American ancestry in their DNA, challenging long-held family narratives and prompting a reevaluation of personal identity. Moreover, cultural affiliation is often a choice, whereas genetics is not. The resurgence of Native American identity among individuals with partial indigenous ancestry in South Carolina illustrates how cultural reawakening can be more powerful than genetic percentage alone. Ultimately, genetics can inform, but it cannot define identity on its own. Culture gives meaning to our biology. In a state as historically complex as South Carolina, the interplay between the two underscores a central truth. Our ancestry is part of us, but how we live, remember, and pass on our stories is just as important, if not more so. What this changes. The revelations from South Carolina's genetic study represent more than just scientific discovery. They challenge long-standing assumptions about identity, race, heritage, and history. For many residents, the findings are both deeply personal and socially significant, prompting conversations about belonging, ancestry, and how we understand ourselves and our communities. One of the most profound changes is in education. Historical narratives, especially those taught in schools, often gloss over the complex intermingling of peoples that shaped the South. These new genetic findings offer evidence that can enrich and diversify the way South Carolina's history is taught, shifting the story from simplified racial binaries to a more nuanced portrait of multicultural exchange and migration. Healthcare is another area affected by this research. With a clearer understanding of the genetic diversity within the state, public health officials can better tailor medical treatments and screenings to populations at higher risk for certain inherited conditions. This could lead to more accurate diagnostics, earlier interventions, and improved health outcomes for historically underserved communities. For individuals, genetic testing can be transformative. Many South Carolinians have discovered ancestry that challenges what they thought they knew about their roots. This can lead to powerful reckonings with personal identity, a deeper understanding of family history, and renewed interest in cultural preservation or reconnection. Socially, the study promotes empathy and shared understanding. It reveals how interconnected people truly are, often in ways they never imagined. By seeing the full spectrum of ancestry, African, European, Indigenous, and more residents may be inspired to move beyond stereotypes and appreciate the shared complexity that defines South Carolina today. In short, this changes the way people see the state, their neighbors, and themselves. It's not just about DNA, it's about rewriting the story of who South Carolinians are and where they truly come from. What's next? With the success of the South Carolina genetic study, researchers, educators, and community leaders are looking ahead to a future filled with new possibilities. The next steps involve both deepening and expanding the research, as well as applying the insights gained to areas like education, public health, and community engagement. One major goal is to continue collecting DNA samples, particularly from underrepresented communities. Researchers hope to include more participants from rural areas, indigenous tribes, and immigrant populations to create an even more detailed and inclusive genetic map. These efforts will not only help complete the picture of South Carolina's genetic diversity, but also ensure that every group's story is represented. In the medical field, next steps include using the data to develop personalized healthcare strategies. Genetic markers linked to chronic conditions like diabetes, heart disease, and sickle cell anemia can now be studied more precisely within the context of South Carolina's population. This could revolutionize how doctors approach treatment plans and preventive care for specific demographic groups. There are also plans to build educational initiatives around the findings. Museums, schools, and libraries may collaborate with scientists and historians to create exhibits, lesson plans, and community discussions that bring the state's genetic heritage to life for students and families. Additionally, future research may explore how environmental, dietary, and social factors interact with genetics to influence health and behavior. There's growing interest in combining genetic data with historical records, migration patterns, and oral histories to create a multi-dimensional archive of South Carolina's human story. Ultimately, what's next is not just about more science, it's about connection. This study has opened doors for South Carolinians to learn more about who they are and where they come from. The future lies in using that knowledge to build stronger, healthier, and more unified communities. For more interesting genetic revelations and histories, subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss an update.